Thank you. So with that sad note as our introduction, let me direct the first question to you, Governor Ridge. I'll call you Governor and him Secretary so we know who we're talking about.
I answer to both.
Yeah. And on September 11th, you did answer to Governor, and you literally left your job in a matter of days, taking a job in Washington. You didn't have a home except the governor's mansion. You had no idea what the job was about, no idea, even as I recall you telling me what the salary was, no idea where you'd live in Washington, but those were days when people did things like that right after 9/11. Knowing what you know now, I don't know if Secretary Johnson did this, but let's make believe he did. The day he got appointed, if he had called you and asked you for advice and said, you know, what's the one thing I really need to know about this job that's not obvious? What's the one thing I need to watch out for? What would you or what did you tell him?
Well, first of all, Steve and Atlantic, let me thank you for giving us an opportunity to participate. It was a very important forum, and I thank you for that. First of all, you should know that the Secretary-designate did call. And the first thing I told the Secretary Johnson was that there's only 3 people in town that know how tough your job is and is going to be. Yours truly and my 2 successors. And I don't recall the specifics of it, but I did recall generally commenting about how important it will be for him to upgrade the morale of the enterprise. There had been multiple vacancies. It's pretty difficult to lead an organization when you have key people in the organization. Those slots remained unfulfilled. He inherited a rather significant gap in personnel at the highest levels. I forewarned him of the challenge of dealing with 100-plus agencies, 100-plus committees and subcommittees on the Hill. And the last thing I said to him is, Mr. Secretary, as I started this conversation, you got a tough job. Nobody in this town knows how tough it is. Call me if I can help. We've had several conversations since that time.
And what would you, Secretary Johnson, tell your successor, whether it's a successor appointed by Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, although we know that's going to be Rudy Giuliani, so he knows everything anyway, so he probably wouldn't ask you for the advice, but what would you tell a successor?
First of all, Steve, thank you for your journalism. Thank you for the work you put into the article in this month's Atlantic magazine. I know you spent a lot of time on it, and I thought it was very, very helpful. So thank you, and it helpful in advancing the conversation in a positive, productive way. My message to my successor will be several. One is the nature of our business in Homeland Security is you're always on defense, and in our world, and Tom knows this, good news is no news. If there's a successful national political convention from a security standpoint, or a successful UN General Assembly, or a successful visit by the President to the Far East, it's the result of a lot of hard work and dedication and professionalism by people who work for us. That doesn't always get reported. Bad news is front page news, but the good news in Homeland Security is very often no news. So one of the things that we continually have to do is to make sure that our people are recognized for the work that they do on defense, protecting the homeland, protecting the American people, protecting their leaders, protecting cyberspace. So we continually need to thank them, stress the good work that they do, and recognize it, and project it to the American public, whether it's aviation security, port security, cybersecurity. We have our challenges. My other message will be, please continue the work that we've begun on management reform. Through the Unity of Effort initiative that I started a little over 2 years ago, we've done a lot to make the department a more effective and efficient place. And that work needs to continue. We need to continue to work with Congress to get them to embrace some of my unity of effort initiatives. Don't have to call it unity of effort, that was my emblem, but there are some things pending in Congress right now that will improve the way the department does business, like reorganizing MPPD into a meaner and leaner cyber and infrastructure protection agency. And so that work very much needs to continue. I think that needs to be priority one in addition to the general work of protecting the homeland.
So let me ask you this. This is a hard question by definition. Governor, how many terrorist attacks do you think we will suffer in the United States in the next year?
What type?
How many?
How many?
How many? What's your guess?
Well, listen, I think I'm not going to speculate on a number. I just think that we need to accept the reality that the threat surface has changed, the number of actors has increased, the profile of those actors is significantly different than it was on September 10th, 2001. There's an inevitability to the attacks. There's no way, if you take a look at what's happened in France over the past 6 months, there's a variety of means by which they can inflict their damage and affect the psyche of a country and bring pain and suffering to families and communities. They had a stabbing in Paris. They had a truck running over dozens of people in Nice. You had the mass shooting on November 13th, and yesterday they found gas cylinders in an automobile outside of Notre Dame. So I think we should not, I think we should just accept the inevitability, but after 15 years in reflection, what I really think the country needs to do is accept the reality that it is a global scourge, accept the reality that it will probably happen again here. You have no idea how many times. There's no way to predict it, particularly with the individual actor, the single actors, but put it in the context of everything else that happens to impact our lives in a very negative way in this country. 400 to 500 people died over Labor Day, and they got in their automobile on Friday morning and they didn't go home to their loved ones on Monday. Nearly 40,000 people are going to die in automobile accidents. Now, I'm not trying to say that the pain or the suffering of a terrorist attack is insignificant, isn't real. It is. But I want America to dial down some of the hyperbole and the hyperventilation. I don't want us to be breathless about this. Let's reflect over the past 15 years. We're safer now than we've ever been. There's still gaps. Let's close the gaps and let's accept it, and don't ever, ever change what we do because we're fearful of another attack.
So you sound like President Obama.
Pardon me?
You sound like President Obama. He said and was quoted...
I wouldn't go that far, but that's okay.
Was quoted... Well, let me take a shot at it. He was quoted in The Atlantic in an interview with Jeff Goldberg saying that he wishes Americans would adopt that perspective and look at it that way. And he was immediately attacked by Republicans, in essence, for throwing in the towel.
Well, no,
Are you throwing in the towel? All those years on the job made you give up?
No, listen, to that extent, I will associate myself with the president's observation that we accept the reality. Nobody likes it. We don't want to accept it. But it is a global scourge. And so just let's not be breathless about it. Frankly, with all respect to the journalists and the media that cover it, there's more coverage on that isolated attack that goes for days and days than there is of the automobile accidents, of the 600 or 700 people that get killed in major urban areas because of gun violence. So let's accept the reality. It is painful. It affects our psyche, but let's try to put it in perspective, as the president, I don't recall those remarks, but if that's what he said, I think he's right on that issue. Not that we shouldn't
take a stab at
make
this?
sure.
So what's your number first? Is it 2 attacks in the next 12 months, 4, 6, 3?
Well, first of all, what constitutes a terrorist attack versus 15 years ago
Good point.
has
Someone
evolved.
who gets an assault weapon
significantly.
and yells out a couple of ISIS
Right,
phrases.
and if you're asking how many San Bernardino or Orlando type attacks will we have in the year 2017, no national security, homeland security, or law enforcement expert is in a position to quantify it.
But will you
is-
say we will have? Can you even given your
We have
job,
we have
can
not
you concede
ended,
that we will have them?
We have not ended the scourge, the threat of homegrown violent extremism. People ask me, what keeps you up at night? That is thing number one, the prospect of another homegrown or homeborn violent extremist acquiring a weapon or a tool of mass violence and carrying out an attack someplace here in the homeland. It cannot be quantified. It is difficult to detect, given the nature of it. In my view, what we in Homeland Security need to do, in addition to all the things we're already doing in terms of aviation security, our CVE efforts, is to continually remind the American people of all the things we are doing, the 10 or 12 things we're doing constantly to secure the homeland, but to also say to them, there's a role for the public through awareness, through vigilance. I think that the public understands in a free and open democratic society, you cannot eliminate all risk, whether it's a terrorist attack or a mass shooting or gang violence. We cannot end it tomorrow. We can and we should reduce it as much as possible, consistent with our values and consistent with our laws. But the prospect of an HVE attack is still there, and we need to address it.
I think the Secretary and I would agree. By definition, democracies are soft targets, just by definition, because we're so open. And every day we got to get smarter. Every day we got to try to identify potential threats. But the Secretary is absolutely right. We're open because we're a democracy, and we start closing ourselves, we lose the value system. If America's got a brand, it's our value system, and our value system is freedom. And we start stepping on our own toes and start undermining our own freedoms, they begin to win.
Let me ask the Secretary this question. Apropos that, bioterror, dirty bombs, air safety, ferries, food security, cyber attacks, even cyber election day attacks. Which of those worries you the most?
Well, it's always an evolving picture, and the nature of Homeland Security is we've got to be focused on all of what you've just
So everything's
listed.
a priority.
Well,
If everything's
you can't say
how
everything's
can
a
anything
priority.
be a
The way that I look at it, and I think the way Tom looked at it when he was in office, is you've got threats that are high impact, but not necessarily high probability. And then you've got threats that are high probability, but likely or perhaps less impact, like an HVE attack, which could involve as many as 50, as many as 10.
Tell everyone what
different scale.
HVE means,
Homegrown
especially those of
violent
us from
extremism.
Washington.
Homegrown violent
not from
extremism.
Washington.
And so we've got, at any given time, those that we consider high probability, but then there are also those like the dirty bomb prospect that are plainly high impact, and we've got to assess where we devote our resources, what we ask Congress for in our budgets to try to prioritize it all. You have to prioritize. You can't say it's all a priority.
But isn't it a fact, though, that if something happens in one of those areas, you will be attacked in Congress, especially by the opposite party, for not having done enough in that area after the fact?
No question.
We get attacked in Congress no matter what we do.
But there's
Correct.
no such
But if
thing.
somebody-
Yeah. You know, DHS is like a political piñata. As soon as something bad happens, somebody up on the hill takes a swing at us.
That's a reality, yes.
It's a reality.
But
From what
There you go.
I'm hearing here,
But in all fairness, and I think Tom knows this, I think we've done a lot in the last several years to educate the public and educate Congress on a lot of the good work that we do. Given the current state of global terrorism, given the current state of the homeland threat, people are focused much more on the DHS mission, and I think a lot of people see a lot of the good work that we do. They see, for example, how wait times at airports were reduced this summer after we devoted a lot of resources and effort to it. There's always more work to be done. It's still very much a work in progress. Our department's only 13 years old. But I think I'm fairly certain we're improving morale within the department. And I think there are a lot of people, particularly in Congress, that see that.
Well, you have a ways to go with morale, according to the
Well,
surveys you and I
the
talked
FEB
about.
survey is coming out in a couple of weeks, and we'll see how we did. I know
Now-
participation in the FEB survey went way up this year.
So
That's
I
a
must
good
say,
sign.
you must be watching or going to a different set of congressional hearings than I watched and went to when I was doing this article. You say
When I leave
Congress
here, I'm
is-
going to Capitol Hill.
Congress is learning to appreciate all the great stuff you guys do? I don't see that in any of
I
the
think
hearings.
people who, I believe people who pay attention on our oversight committees, who understand our work, do.
Well, that's a good
But
qualifier.
I do spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill. In my first year in office, I testified 12 times.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because we shouldn't let the time go by without talking about your assessment of the job Congress does when it comes to Homeland Security in terms of organizing itself for oversight, in terms of making a constructive contribution to oversight. It seemed to me, and I wrote this in the article, that the most undeniably bad actor in the whole Homeland Security scenario was Congress, in the sense of everyone's refusal to cede turf, and you have dozens of committees and hundreds of subcommittees who claim jurisdiction, and everybody in Congress admits it. They just say, well, we just don't want to give up our jurisdiction. I take it you two agree on that. What can you do about it?
I think every secretary and every deputy secretary and all the agency heads, in spite of a decade-long appeal to the Congress of the United States to reduce the number of committees of oversight, the refrain has been ignored for well over a decade. I remember the first year that I was secretary, I testified on the Hill more often than Secretary Rumsfeld did, and we were both engaged in Iraq and Afghanistan at the time. But it's not just the secretaries. And as someone who spent 12 years in the Congress of the United States, I understand the importance and the value and the relevance of congressional oversight. Clearly it's needed. But when it is so spread out, it's almost a dysfunctional oversight of an emerging department. And frankly, it'd be a lot easier if the secretary, of whoever succeeds Secretary Johnson, has the opportunity to build relationships with a smaller group of men and women on the Hill to help him and him or her, whoever's going to be the secretary, continue to build on his unity of effort. It is so disparate. And frankly, you still see vestiges of the silos that we inherited. From time to time, they'll just run up to their friends on the Hill. And you really need to condense the oversight and frankly, to make the department a lot more effective.
The executive branch in 2002 reorganized itself to deal with Homeland Security. The legislative branch did not. And the way it should work, which is the way it worked when I was general counsel of DOD, is you've got an Armed Services Committee in each house, and then you've got your appropriations subcommittees in each house, and that's who you deal with. Yeah. We have, depending on how you count, between 92 and 108 committees and subcommittees of Congress that purport to exercise oversight jurisdiction over our department, and that consumes time. I read every letter I get from members of Congress, and I get a lot of them. It consumes time to respond to that. Notwithstanding that, we have dramatically reduced the time it takes to respond to a congressional letter down to something like 14 days, and we actually say something in these letters. The real impact, and this is how it hurts Homeland Security, it's very, very difficult to get an authorization bill. It is very difficult to get a bill to authorize any of our missions when you have to go to multiple different committees and you're pulled in multiple different directions to get a bill out of a committee, out of a House of Congress, if you cannot look to just one committee to make that happen. And that hurts Homeland Security. And I'm hoping that one of these days, Congress is going to finally grapple with this just to improve the manner in which we go about protecting our homeland. We need to do that. Tom is right. You got to have congressional oversight, and that's key to how separation of powers works, but there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it.
Let me ask two questions related to two specific possible vulnerabilities and hope for brief answers. First of all, of the election day coming, for a year plus, cyber's been sort of at the top of everybody's list of potential Homeland Security threats. What about cyber election attacks?
It would be, Steve, very difficult to, through any sort of cyber intrusion, to alter the ballot count, simply because it is so decentralized and so vast. You've got state governments, local governments, county governments involved in the election process. It would be very difficult to alter the count.
But you've offered to help local.
Yes,
local
we are
officials.
concerned about bad cyber actors, generally state actors, hacktivists, criminals that intrude into the internet presence of state election officials generally. And so we're offering assistance to these officials by way of cyber hygiene evaluations, incident response, information sharing. There's a lot of chatter on the internet about what that could mean. It does not mean a federal takeover of state election systems or state elections or even national elections. We don't have the authority to do that. What we do in Homeland Security, in cybersecurity, is offer assistance when people ask for it. So I've been trying to educate state election officials about what we are in a position to offer them to help them manage their election systems.
Thank you. So, Governor, I want to ask you a last question. You were the co-chair of a report issued in last fall about a bioterror threat.
Correct.
And the report pretty strongly said that the current government, the current department, the current administration was not doing nearly enough. And my question, as I was reading that, was, well, what happened from the days of the anthrax attacks when that was at the top of everybody's list? We were spending all kinds of money and running around putting sensors all over the place that apparently didn't work. Why aren't we still worried about that? It's almost as if we solved the problem, but isn't it still a threat, and shouldn't this guy over here be doing more about it?
I think, again, Secretary Johnson's recognized that the existing system we have, BioWatch, is flawed, and he's done everything he possibly could change it. But Steve is referring to a bipartisan commission, one of the few that's actually working and rather well in Washington, D.C., with Joe Lieberman, Tom Daschle, Donna Shalala, Bill Greenwood, Jim Greenwood, et cetera. And we took a look, particularly in 15 years after anthrax. I mean, one of the gaps, and there's still gaps that the next secretary is going to try to close, one of the most significant gaps, in my judgment, is biodefense. I mean, face it, this is 15 years ago anthrax, and yet we still don't have a strategy. We don't have a consolidated effort to build a capability to respond as quickly as we possibly can. We were slow in our response to H1N1. We were slow in our response to Ebola. We saw Zika coming. We were slow response, and this is probably more to do with agencies external to DHS, but frankly, that's a real threat. Whether the terrorists weaponize a pathogen or Mother Nature throws one at us, I think that one of the most serious long-term threats from either source is the biological area. And 15 years after anthrax, we're still struggling to have a strategy and then operationalize a capability to respond quickly with a vaccine and to recover from an incident, particularly with a contagious pathogen. So it's a real problem.
Let me give you a half a minute to respond if you want to.
I think Tom is right to focus on this. We are focused on it in DHS. We spent a lot of time on Ebola in the fall of 2014 through a lot of courageous effort by our healthcare community and our military. We were able to deal with it in West Africa. We were able to limit the manner in which people from those countries could enter the United States, potentially infected with the Ebola virus. And we dealt with it in this country in the few cases that propped up, and it's been a hugely heroic, successful effort in West Africa.
Yeah. Let me just I'm not critical of my colleague because he did a great job in responding, but a lot of this is outside his jurisdiction. We always react to an incident, but you had anthrax, and one of these days, our friends on the Hill and some of these other executive agencies, we need to be a lot more preemptive, because we know Mother Nature is going to throw something else at us, and God forbid the terrorists do, and we know terrorists play around with bio. So the fact that the Secretary was able to lead a very aggressive response, kudos across the board. But we're always in the response mode. And at some point in time, as we're dealing with multiple threats that the Secretary and I have both identified, we have to start thinking preemptively rather than just reacting to the next incident.
We got to stay on time.
I'm going
And we're
to
out
be
of time,
preemptive
but,
and say that we're out of time.
Can I say one thing?
And thank our two secretaries, and I'll yield, of course.
one thing, Secretary's prerogative.
He's the guy
As you
with the
probably
Secret
can
Service
tell,
agents in the room.
as you
so
probably
go
can
ahead.
tell, the prior Republican Secretary of Homeland Security and the current Democratic Secretary of Homeland Security, as well as the two others, have a very good relationship. For the most part, 99% of the time, our relationship is bipartisan, nonpartisan. I spent last 9/11 in Shanksville with Governor Ridge. So this weekend, we look back what happened 15 years ago, albeit with a World Trade Center, but we also have to look forward. So tomorrow, I'm having a program at the new World Trade Center to mark the U.S. government's return to One World Trade Center. We are a remarkably resilient country in ways that we don't always appreciate. We come back stronger every time, whether it's the Boston Marathon or 9/11 or Oklahoma City, and I hope the public remembers that. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you. Good way to close it. Thank you. Thank you all.